All right, here are solutions for quiz 4 for Math 95. Our intro to functions here. So we're given a function, f of x equals this mess, and asked a few things. The first one is to evaluate f of 1. Really the challenge here is understanding what this question means, what they're asking you to do here. And basically what they're asking you to do is, if you think about this function as a machine, they're asking you what would come out of this machine if you put 1 into it. And this little rule up here tells us what comes out of the machine if you put x into it. It says x squared over 2x plus 3 would come out. So if you want f of 1, it's the same basic idea, except everywhere you see an x, you replace it with the 1. So I'd get 1 squared over 2 times 1 plus 3. 1 squared is 1, 2 times 1 is 2, and 2 plus 3 is 5. So 1/5 would come out of this machine if I put the number 1 into it. That's it. Second one, evaluate f of a plus h. Really, it's the same as the first one here. Maybe even easier than the first one, just looks more complicated. All this is saying is, same machine, now instead of putting in x or putting in 1, I'm going to put in a plus h. I'm going to put in this thing. So everywhere I see the letter x, I got an x up on that, f of a, it's horrible handwriting. Let me try that again. F of a plus h just means copy your formula here, your rule, except wherever you see an x, replace it with an a plus h. So instead of having x squared up top, I'd have a plus h squared. Note I need the parentheses because I want to square this entire thing. And then on the bottom, I'd have 2 times a plus h plus 3. You can definitely rewrite this in lots of different ways. You could expand this out, you could distribute the 2, but it says no need to simplify. So if there's no need to simplify, this mess right here is good enough. We'll call that the answer. All right, moving on. Part C. Part C says, okay, so part C, the challenge here is that A and C look pretty similar. This one's asking you to evaluate f of 1. This one's asking you to find all values of x so that f of x equals 1. F of x equals 1 and f of 1 look similar, but they're not the same. This is saying when you put 1 in, what will come out? This is saying, what must you put in to make 1 come out? So you stare at this thing here and you're like, well, what would I change all the x's into to make 1 come out of this machine? That's a hard question, but fortunately what we can do is we can set it up as an equation. F of x equals x squared over, what was it, 2x plus 3? F of x is this, and what I want to do is solve this equation. I want to know when f of x equals 1, what x must be equal to make f of x equal 1. And you'll note that what we have here is a rational equation, right? Instead of 1, I could think about it as 1 divided by 1. And now what I have is a rational equation. Think back to, this is 7.6 in our book. The way you solve when you have a rational equation is you come to the realization that you hate the fact that these things look like fractions. You wish they didn't. You wish there were no denominators at all. And we can make it so that there's no denominator if we multiply both sides of the equation by the least common denominator. Well, in this case, least common denominator is pretty easy. It's just this 2x plus 3 thing, times 1 if you want. But when you multiply 1 by something, you don't change its value. So it's the 2x plus 3 that I'm going to multiply both sides of the equation by. And the reason I do that is because now things will cancel out. These 2x plus 3's cancel out, and I'm left with just an x squared on this side of the equation. On this side, I have 1 times 2x plus 3, which is just 2x plus 3. So what I now have is an equation which I can solve. Solving equations when you have an x squared and an x term, the strategy is to set the equation equal to 0. So I'll subtract 2x from both sides and subtract 3 from both sides and get here. And then try to factor. If the left-hand side factors, it's going to factor into this form right here. And I'll have to figure out what goes here and here. And the answer to that is it'll be two numbers that multiply to give me -3 and add to give me -2. So let's see, -3 times +1 is -3. And -3 plus +1 is -2. So it looks like this is the factored form right here. The advantage of having a factored form equals 0 is this is something times something else. The things inside the parentheses are being multiplied together to get 0. And the only way you can multiply together two numbers and get 0 is if either the first one is 0 or the second one is 0. So I've changed this one hard equation into two easier equations. I can solve each of those, add 3 to both sides or subtract 1 from both sides, and I get my solutions. What this is saying is that if x equals 3, if you change all the x's into 3's, that would be 9 divided by 6 plus 3, which is 9, I'd get 1. Turns out if you change all the x's into -1, it also works. -1 squared is +1. 2 times -1 is -2, plus 3 is +1, and 1 over 1 is 1. So here are my two solutions. All right, question 2 is asking you a lot of the same things you saw in question 1. Not all the same things, but similar. The difference is they don't tell me the equation of this function g. Just give me a picture of it. But that's okay. We can figure that out. When it says evaluate g of -2, this is asking you what comes out of the machine when you put -2 into the machine. Well, if you put -2 into the machine, that means the x-coordinate is -2. So my x-coordinate, the horizontal one, is -2, right here. This is -2. And if you put -2 into the machine, looks like 2 would come out. So evaluate g of -2, g of -2 equals 2. It's the height of the graph when the x-coordinate is equal to -2. This question looks similar, kind of like A and C on the first part looks similar, but it's actually quite different. This is saying, you tell me the input, you tell me the x value that will make the height, the output, be -2. So you go up to your graph here and you're like, well, the height is -2 right here. Right? This is where the height is -2. So I got to figure out what input, what left and right has -2 as the height. Well, it looks like it's this value right here, whatever this point is. This point right here looks like it happens at -4. So I'm going to say g of -4 is equal to -2. Find all values of x, so I guess x equals -4 would be my answer. State the domain of g, and you can use either interval notation or set builder notation. All right, to figure out the domain, what you do is you look at the picture and you kind of think about the shadow onto the x-axis. The domain are all values of x for which the graph has a corresponding height. So note that any x value between -4 and +1 has a height. It's a different height, but it's got some height associated with it. So what I want are all the x values from -4 to +1. Sorry, -1, right? Let's see. -4 to -1. So I want everything from -4 to -1. And because these circles are closed here, that means I want to include -4 and -1. The way you include -4 and -1, if you're using interval notation, you use these closed brackets. If you're using set builder notation, you'd say the set of all x such that, and then we want my x value to be between -4 and -1. So I say x has to be greater than or equal to -4, less than or equal to -1. Either of these two answers would work. And we're going to do something very similar for the last question on the quiz here, find the range. Range is a lot like the domain, except now it's not all the possible x values, it's all the possible y values. So what heights can come out of this machine? What numbers could come out of this machine? If you're allowed to put in anything you want. Well, let's see, I could get 2 out of this machine. I'd have to put in -2 and 2 would come out. I get -2 out of this machine if I put -4 in. And I could also get every single height in between. So everything from -2 to +2 can come out of this machine, including those points. So I would say it's everything from -2 up to +2, including those points. There's interval notation. Set builder notation would be the set of all x, such that x is between -2 and +2, including those 2 points. Either one of these answers would work. It's the last question, so I guess that's the end of this video.